Welcome to episode 1 of the Sustainable Commodities podcast, the podcast about forest risk commodities for the food industry and any manufacturers who use forest risk commodities. With me is Judith Murdoch, my co-host, and in this episode, we're just going to do an overview on EUDR, the European Union Deforestation Regulation. Judith is an expert in, well, most things sustainability, but specifically in palm oil and forest risk commodities.
Yeah, well, to kick off with, I think one of the most important things that's happening at the moment is that there's a huge amount of information flooding the market about EUDR. And a lot of people are really thinking, well, how on earth are we going to deliver this? So one of the things that we've been looking at is some really practical ways of actually answering the EUDR. And the first one is, you mentioned forests. It's that fact that it's the forests that have been taken, that this was land that was originally covered with forest. It could be in Malaysia and Indonesia, but it could also be in South America. And certainly from an EU perspective, what they want to get back is to get back to the polygons. And a polygon is something that's 4 hectares or above. So that's 4 rugby pitches.
So just to kind of go back a bit in terms of the basics. So this is the EUDR, the European Union Deforestation Regulation. It's a piece of legislation that's coming up. It's going to go into force at the end of this year, December 30th, 2024. And from that point, anyone who uses forest risk commodities, so that could be cattle, soya, palm oil, rubber,
cocoa, coffee.
Yeah, anyone who uses any of these and who exports, imports or trades in the EU will need to prove that those ingredients haven't come from an area that was deforested after December 2020.
That's it.
Yeah. Okay. And you're saying that to do that, the EU wants them to go back to, they want to be able to trace where they got their stuff back to a polygon, which is
something that is above 4 hectares.
Okay.
So obviously it can be a lot bigger, and I'm not seeing anything that says that a polygon, actually to the largest size, I'm not seeing anything on that yet. That's not to say that it's not beginning to appear. But one of the things that is really making people quite nervous is, well, how do we do this? So let's just think about palm oil specifically for this conversation. And one of the things that people are starting to get very nervous about is that people often will contract their palm oil for quite a long way out. So they'll be thinking that if they're going to meet the legislation, that they need to be making it halfway through this year, because the ships will leave within 3 months of so to get from origin to country. And obviously we've suddenly got the Red Sea been an issue, so we're actually seeing shipping taking far longer. So all of that side is beginning to build. So I can imagine there's an awful lot of people beginning to become very, very nervous about what happens if we don't understand where our material's coming from, and the EU sticks to their timescale, and we now have to be compliant.
So how ready, let's say, we work in quite a lot in the food industry. How ready is the food industry for this?
I think a lot of the processors and refiners have been getting ready for some time. They've been involved in a lot of the conversations. So they are ready. But the problem is, it's the scale of the questions that they're going to get asked from everybody below them through to retailers. And I don't think anyone's really anticipated what does that actually mean. And also, no one's seen the platform for the actual due diligence to be uploaded in, and how that's going to work and who's going to be involved. So again, I think there are some people that are quietly confident that they know what they're doing, and others that are probably thinking, I really don't understand what I need to do, and how's that going to affect my business, particularly if you're supplying retailers, whether that be in Europe or in the UK.
Because, on the back of EUDR, you might think, oh, well, we're in the UK, what does it matter? But the UK is introducing some similar legislation too, isn't it?
Yeah.
What's that called?
So that is basically part of the Environment Act, and it's the UK due diligence. But it's all about embedded, and it's all about
what does embedded mean?
So it's if it's contained. So soya, for an example, 80% of the bean crush goes into animal feed. Mm-hmm. So if it's in animal feed that you're feeding to a cow that is producing milk or cheese, you have to be aware of what that animal's fed on. It's probably easier thinking about a chicken, because we know that high protein for a chicken to make it grow fast will potentially be soya, but you will have a responsibility to be able to report on that. And that's where it's a bit mind-blowing for people further down the supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from a kind of producer perspective, they think, well, whoever's supplying it to me must be their responsibility. But that's not necessarily the case, is it? They need that traceability too.
Yeah, they do. And the most important thing is that just because someone's got a policy or a statement, mm-hmm. you've got to be able to verify that. So I think that's one of the most important things, that being able to verify it with confidence is going to be crucial.
And how can you verify? You know, how can a small business do that? Are there mechanisms in place, or what's available now? Say I use palm oil.
Yeah.
How can I get it back to a polygon?
So one of the best things about the UK market right now is that for some time we've been on the sustainable palm oil journey, and that has meant that over the last few years since it first arrived, I think the first material arrived in 2008, which was potentially when we first met. Yeah. So that material arrived in Hull, and it started the ball rolling on certified material. And now we've got virtually 100% certified RSPO palm oil, mm-hmm. which is the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. And then we have some of the remainder of that, which is roughly 10%, is covered by NDPE policies, so no deforestation, no peatland, no exploitation policies. And that means that you have got a degree of strength. However, the most important thing is that if you buy segregated, so segregated means that it comes from a group of mills that have been certified under the RSPO, and it hasn't been mixed with any what might be described as conventional or standard material, so you absolutely know where it's coming from. Mm-hmm. So the RSPO roughly at any one given time has about 550 mills, and we know roughly right now there's about 250 segregated mills. So you're already, if you buy segregated, know you're buying from a limited mills.
Does that mean then I can just forget about it? I can forget about the EUDR and go, well, it's coming from those, it's got the RSPO logo on it, then I'm good to go?
No, because you're going to have to show some form of due diligence. And some of the work that we've been doing, and we've certainly been talking about potentially trying to do some training workshops mm-hmm. With you guys, so that we can show people that they need to go into their own information that they've currently got. So they would have batches of material that they would buy from their suppliers. And if it's someone like a food manufacturer buying from a refiner, they would know that that particular batch was made at that particular time. And then they could ask that refiner to give them more details about the mill data. So I know it's segregated, so I already know it's a small mill list. Mm-hmm. But if I can get more information about the mills that are involved, it narrows it down even further.
So I've heard things like satellite imagery and grid coordinates required. I mean, how does that fit into the picture of EUDR?
So you've already got that, which is the benefit of RSPO. You've already got that information already on the audit reports, which mm-hmm. is the principles and criteria that the audit has to record all of the coordinates. And then satellite mapping has again been going on for some time. You've got a whole range of different providers, but what they're showing is where the deforestation is. There's been a lot of work trying to ensure that the ownership of that land is recorded as well. But what you can see from the satellite mapping is you can see where deforestation has taken place.
So if you had access to that, so if you're buying RSPO, this only applies to palm oil, obviously.
Yeah.
Then you could get hold of that. So you would potentially, you could have that trail back. So you'd be able to say that polygon hasn't been deforested. Great, we're compliant.
Yeah.
I guess palm oil, the supply chain is a lot more mature from a sustainability perspective. I mean, we go back to 2008 with the launch of Book and Claim and Green Palm, which was like a certificate trading program for sustainable palm oil before sustainable palm oil really existed. But what about things like soya, cattle, coffee, rubber? Do they have similar ones, or are they all at kind of different stages?
They're all at different stages. So soya is fairly advanced, but particularly when you're looking at palm oil, the RSPO is probably the certification body, whereas in something like soya there are a whole range, and cocoa is very similar, where it's dependent on the work that some of the suppliers are doing and also some of the certification bodies. So there is actually, there's not just one solution fits all. And again, that's part of the problem, because I think from a government point of view and an EU point of view, so from a UK government and an EU point of view, this idea of, it'll be all right because everyone will work in the same way. Well, they don't, because each one has different levels of complexity. And I think that's just going back to what I was saying about understand what's in your own supply chain is actually, what am I buying? So am I buying palm oil or am I buying a fraction? And if I'm buying a fraction, what is that fraction? And do I understand all of that and then be able to trace it back? In the case of soya, well, is it in my animal feed? And if it is in animal feed, how much can I find out about it? Because that is where the complexity really gets detailed. And then, like with things like cocoa, it is complex because it's a lot of small farmers. But again, it's beginning to, well, what do I know? What am I buying? Where is it coming from? What is my supplier saying? Is it in a policy? What information are they beginning to give? So a lot of it is just, in the first instance, really getting to grips with what is my supply chain? What do I know? That would be a fantastic first step. And I think that's sometimes what people are like, whoa, rushing around and not really thinking about, get the basics right, get the platform right, get that first stage.
So the message is it starts at home, really.
Yeah.
People worrying that the first thing they're going to need to do is they need to look externally for lots of different things.
Yeah.
Actually start by knowing what's in your own supply chain.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of the first tip, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that applies whatever commodity you're using.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, definitely.
And kind of beyond that, you were saying that potentially the timescale at the moment is December 2024. Do you think they're going to stick to that?
I can't see it myself, but I also think that's a really dangerous thing to say because I'm not in the know, am I? There's so much to do, and I think a lot of people are just thinking, particularly from an EU perspective, they're just not going to be able to stick to that because there is so much to do. And I think they'll get pushed because of the comment that I made earlier about things will be in ships. That's the point about Europe and the UK. We do not grow cocoa, we do not grow coffee, we don't grow rubber, we don't grow palm oil. We could grow soya, and there are some European soya growth, but it's tiny. It's not necessarily used at scale anywhere. So again, it's this whole thing of, well, and cattle, for an example, is that cattle is included, and whether you buy it from the EU or outside of the EU, you're going to have to still go through all of the regulations. So again, just going back to, well, do I buy my cattle from Scotland or Ireland or wherever? So this is really the key thing. If things are on the water, you are on countdown now because of the shipping times, and that's what's making a lot of people nervous. And just put it this way, if you have a warehouse full of goods that are not going to be compliant, who's responsible? And obviously, what do you do with it? So I think that's why the EU is going to get pushed, because there would be too much, there could potentially be massive wastage if the EU were to stick to it. No one can tell, but that's going back to get prepared, understand what your base, what you're working from.
So, yeah, the kind of advice is whether or not it's coming in on December the 30th, you need to start preparing now.
Absolutely.
Because I was reading up about some of the potential consequences of non-compliance, and they're pretty stringent. You know, you've got, I think it said 4% of your EU turnover as a fine for non-compliance, which I think that's the starting point as well. Yeah. So it's from 4% upwards. You've got potential confiscation of your goods.
Yeah.
And then for repeat offenders, I think they're talking about a complete ban on trading in the EU, which could be catastrophic for people who are non-compliant.
Yeah.
How stringent do you think they're going to be? Is this going to be a GDPR where I've not heard of anyone being fined for the huge fines that they were threatening at the start, or do you think they're going to be fairly hot on it?
Again, I think it's a really difficult question to answer because you've only got to look at the news in recent weeks about Ukraine and, you know, perhaps what happens in the US with the presidency, et cetera, et cetera. So there could be lots of different impacts. But you feel as if they are making the right noises, that they would be quite harsh. And I guess the example I would give is that we are aware that the US has a range of enforcement, and they did enforce it, and they did ban companies from coming into the US to do with social issues. So, you know, there is track records out there about countries being able to do it. The issue is how much of an issue that would be to the supply chain. But particularly from an RSPO perspective, again, we've had that example where we did have somebody banned who was a major supplier into Europe, and they did stop it, and everybody reacted fairly quickly. So I think you've just got to say there could be two things that go on. One, definitely that the EU actually says what it's going to do, or somebody gets called out for deforestation and just the network of suppliers says, I don't want to risk that, you're out of my supply chain. So that is a possibility too.
So, I mean, again, the lesson to people is take it seriously, because even if the EU is fairly lax on it, the reputational damage, you know, thinking with my PR head on, especially if you're claiming that you're sustainable and that you're squeaky clean, as soon as it's, you know, there's evidence that actually you haven't done your due diligence at all, or that you've been buying soya from somewhere that's been deforested, and that's the kind of stuff that really sticks. That's the kind of time when you need some crisis PR.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I think the other thing is why would you not? The other question is why the EU is giving, as with the UK, is giving you some real ammunition to say, I need to know this, because lots of suppliers will say, well, I don't need to tell you that. Why would I tell you that? So one important thing to highlight is the earlier chemicals industry. So in food, it's law that you have to say what it is, whether it's rapeseed, sunflower, etc. But if it's in earlier chemicals, it often goes by a Latin name or a different description, so you can't tell. Mm-hmm. So now there will be that emphasis on you need to tell us what's in our product. So it has some really positive effects because, again, we do need to change. There's no book that says, oh, well, if you do it like this, that this is going to make the world better. Actually, we have destroyed our rainforests. We have taken so much of the rainforest in the last 60 years. We are already experiencing climate change. And we have, you know, various politicians that are coming and saying, oh, we're not too worried about the environment. We'll put it back. But it's like the time to act now. And I think that consumers are interested and they do want to hear about it. And particularly with palm oil, again, you know, our experience has been so negative, but palm oil is in everything. So, you know, what are you going to do about it?
I think the palm oil thing's, it's a great example of where the reality is lagged by the narrative lags the reality.
Yeah.
I've spent 15 years writing about sustainable palm oil, and still when you mention palm oil to anyone in sustainability, you know, they recoil.
Yeah.
It's like you've just shown it's garlic to a vampire sort of stuff. And yet, you know, the progress that's been made in that time has been quite incredible. And hopefully things like the EUDR will kind of bring more of that, I guess, to more commodities. But yeah, I guess time will tell. I know there's some critics as well of EUDR, specifically around smallholders, how they're going to show compliance. There was some talk that EUDR could essentially stop smallholders from trading into Europe.
Yeah.
Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, I definitely think it's possible because people will move away from smallholders because they're a risk.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that, I've already seen evidence of that people have deliberately moved their supply base away from smallholders. And they've done it maybe over time, and they've maybe compensated them, but the point is that 40% of palm oil comes from smallholders. And when you see how these people farm, they are the people that we need to influence. I visited recently KL. I went to KL and I went to see some smallholders as part of a trip, and I was fascinated by the smallholder plantation we went to. There was 2 sisters, and they were the matriarchs of the village. I mean, I forget how many people were in these villages, but say 250 people. They were all kind of related through marriage and so on. And they'd had rubber and they'd changed to palm oil, and it had really made a difference to them because they could buy food. They weren't dependent on growing the food. But they were in the wrong land. It was peatland. It was incredibly boggy. We got there and there was the guys were showing us to cut the fruit down. You all have a go as Westerners, trying to cut the fruit down and stuff. And they was falling into water, in some areas of the plantation where the trees were. So they shouldn't have really been growing it on that. But again, it's like you have to try and influence these people to do the right things. And, could they be encouraged to put some of that back to forest and actually try to grow the trees in a slightly different place, or grow trees that have got higher yields because they're using better seeds? But the one thing that struck me when I was in this village was that a girl came up. She would be about 14, 15, and I saw her arrive back from school. She changed her school uniform. She was so proud to be able to speak English to us and, puts us to shame. But it changed her life because it meant she could go to school, and her brothers and sisters would be going to school too. And that's what you've got to remember.
Well, there's the social aspect to ESG, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the fact that those smallholders that make up 40% of palm are some of the world's poorest farmers, and this is transformative.
Absolutely.
For them. So whenever we're, should EUDR essentially ban them from the European market, it's going to have a massive impact on them, but it could also actually have kind of a bad impact on deforestation.
Yeah.
Because instead of selling to Europe, they're going to go sell somewhere with less stringent regulations.
Absolutely.
So we've got to be really careful with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just to quote from a UK point of view, we buy about 450,000 tonnes per year. In India, it's about 850,000 tonnes per month. So they're not going to have the same worries about where it's coming from. So although the EU is saying they're not going to ban smallholders, I think they've got to think about the way the market reacts and make sure that they do include them. In palm oil, there's one issue about smallholders, 40%, but think about cocoa, where there's a lot of small farmers. And what does that mean? So I think it's just really important for people to again, understand and encourage. And if they do think smallholders have been excluded, what else could they do? They could fund them in a different way as well. So there's a lot of things they could do.
Yeah, because what we don't want is essentially the big players can then charge a premium.
Yeah.
And because there's less commodity on the market.
Yeah.
And then the smallholders are just forced to sell cheaper in other markets.
Yeah.
And if it isn't implemented right, there's a risk that happens.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we've done a kind of good first step on EUDR. Before we wrap up, what's the kind of first step? If I'm in the UK, what do I need to do first around EUDR?
I think look at the commodities that are affected in the EUDR and decide, are they in your business and at what level? And investigate your supply base and look at the policies that they have, and then begin to get that traceability journey underway is the first one. Obviously, keep an eye on what's happening in the legislation, but start at home first.
Great. All right. Thank you very much, Judith.
Thank you.
Great, thanks for listening to the first episode of the Sustainable Commodities podcast. We'll be releasing regular episodes in the future. And in the meantime, if you want to know more about sustainability, please speak to Judith. And if you want help with any aspect of marketing, design or PR, speak to me. You'll find our contact details in the show notes. Thanks. And we'll speak to you next time.
Okay, bye.